Hello everyone and welcome back. We're on our trip around Scotland at the moment, but I thought I'd take a little bit of time out and do a little program on my watercolour brushes and palettes and paints. There's been a lot of requests about wanting to know about them, so I thought I'd take the chance to do this. We're parked by the banks of Loch Moray, and it's a beautiful loch, and it's just south of Mallaig on the west coast of Scotland, and a really lovely place. We had a really horrible wet day yesterday. We resorted to sitting in the van with the rain coming down, looking out the van, wanting the weather to clear up, but it never did. So it just thundered down all day long. So today it's looking totally different, and I feel much better because of it. So we'll take a look at the brushes now. Here are the brushes I use, and there aren't too many of them. I don't want to carry around too many brushes. I feel this is almost too many as it is, so this is the most I'd ever carry. Majoritarily, they're Kolinsky Sable brushes, but they're the best quality sable brushes that you can use, but I'm not sure whether it's completely needed. They may make them a little bit better, but they're not terrifically better from a synthetic sable brush, so I'd be happy to use synthetic sable as well. These particular brushes here, this is my biggest biggest sable brush, and this is made by Raphael. These brushes are super expensive. I don't know whether I'd buy them now. I was very lucky with these brushes when I bought them 10-15 years ago. I found a wonderful deal on them. It was actually on eBay. Obviously somebody had a go at it and thought, nah, I don't want to do watercolour, but so I was lucky enough to buy this. It was a whole set, about 5 or 6 brushes, and I got them for about £70, and that was amazing. This brush now is probably worth about £200, so it was a great deal. So that's the biggest one I've got, and I use this one probably the most of all the brushes that I have. They do a bigger version of this, a number 16 I think, which is I'd love to have, but that's about £250, so maybe not yet anyway. And then the next one I have is the number 10 Raphael brush, and then it goes to the number 6, and then the number 4, and then the number 0, and I think there's a number 1 that I use as well. So those are round brushes really, but a lot of my work is done with those brushes, so really nice. Then I have a few mops, and this brush here I've had for a long time as well, an Isabey brush, a number 8. It's a really big squirrel hair brush, and I use this brush when I've got a really lot of space to use. When I'm doing one of my big full sheet 30 by 22 paintings, I use this one a lot because it really does cover the surface, and I haven't found anything better than that. But the squirrel hair, it just holds a lot of water, and I can really get a lot of water down, a lot of pigment down very quickly, so that's a nice thing. Then recently I bought these 2 brushes, and I've really quite enjoyed them. These are much cheaper. They're professional watercolours by Winsor and Newton, but they're synthetic, a mix of synthetics and sable, really, and they're very good. And I use this big one in particular, and this has become my mop brush. This is a brush I use for paintings of around about 20-inch wide, something like that, and smaller. And I find that really good. I'm surprised how good it is, and I quite like it. It's more of a chisel shape. It's a flatter chisel shaped brush rather than you see the difference there? Rather than the round brushes. So you can see it's a much, almost like the same design as an oil painting brush, a flat filbert brush or a square-ended brush. But I like that. I think it's quite good. Then I've got this one as well by the same make, just a smaller version. And I haven't really used that. That really hasn't matched up to what I was expecting it to be. Maybe I keep it in there because from time to time it's quite useful, because you can paint with these flat brushes, you can paint full broad width, but then instantly you can turn it on its side and make it a thinner brush. So I think that's quite an interesting thing too. So that's nice. There's another brush that I have, but not necessarily for my painting process, and this is this brush here. This is an oil painting hog's hair brush, and this brush I use for cleaning my palette. So I don't use it for any painting, but it's really useful for when I need to clean my palette quickly, and it just goes in and cleans it, and it's done. So that's the other ancillary brush I use for pretty practical purposes. The next part of brushes really is how you carry them, and I think that's a really important point, because carrying the brushes when you're a planner and painter is so crucial, and they have to be in good shape when you get there. So I use one of these really cheap plastic tube containers that you unscrew on, and I find them really good. The little change I've done to it really is I've drilled some little holes all the way around at the top and the bottom to let a bit of moisture out of it, because if you leave the brushes wet in these things, I don't think that's really good for it. So just trying to get a little bit of air circulation in it, I think it's a good idea. So I'll take that off. So these are the brushes all carefully placed in there, and I use a little bit of a little stick here, which is useful, so that it's a little bit longer than my longest brush. So when I close the container, it doesn't crush and bend over the top element, so it always keeps them sort of non-ruckled up. So that's that. A little change I'm doing as well with my watercolour, my plein air watercolour painting, is that I'm using this as a storage device on my easel. I used to have a board, which I sometimes use, but mainly not use now. Not because it's a bad idea or anything, but it's because we carry so much stuff now. In the old days, I used to just go out and paint with watercolour, and that was it. But now I've got to carry on a whole lot of video gear, and there's so much stuff to carry. So I'm trying to make it a little bit more simple, and trying to cut down weight more than anything else. So I'm using this. So I've chopped a bit of the plastic. It used to be about that long, and now it's this long, and put a bit of string around so that I can sort of just hang it on the end of the easel. So I really find that a good idea, and you'll see me using that in future videos. We'll come on to my paints now, and I use a Tupperware box to transport my paints, and it has a little locking mechanism which is really good. It's never let me down yet. And I use a couple of different sizes of paints really as well. So I use the 37mm brush paints, and those are colours I use when I use a lot of them. So like Cerulean blue I use a lot of, and ultramarine blue I use a lot of. So I buy the bigger tubes of that. So I never worry about running out of paints, and also they're more economical to buy when they're in the bigger tubes. I use these smaller 14mm tubes as well, and those are the colours I don't use that often, like this yellow, cadmium yellow light or cadmium yellow pale. That's not a colour I use that often, so I keep the tube small. Everything I do is considering weight as well, so if I can make things lighter, I will. Coming on to the pièce de résistance of my watercolour setup is my palette, and I really love this palette. It's one of the best investments I made in watercolour painting. No, it is the best investment, without a doubt. And this one... Oh. Keep going. You don't want to do that too often. So this one here is made by the Little Brass Box Company, and it's a fantastic palette. It came in this little pouch, and I do use the pouch because it does keep it protected. So there we go, it comes out of there. So there's the palette, and it's awesome palette. So I've set it up as I bought it. So initially when I bought it, it came with this other top flap here, and you can see that, so there, and then you pick it up there like that, and that's a really nice thing. But you know, I found that I wasn't really using it, and I do a painting, and it was completely clean. So I thought, well, why bother with it? I think maybe in studio scenarios you might find it useful, but I found that the other palettes were more than enough for what I needed, and in between just cleaning it off a bit, it just didn't seem worthwhile. So what happens here, what's quite clever about this palette is you've got a little pin here. I'll move closer to it. You've got a little pin right here, and you pull that out. So pull it out, and the palette drops off. So that was really useful. So now I'm just left with my palette that you normally see me use, which is amazing. It's just a fantastic palette, and it has helped me. Now I get a lot of questions about palettes and what palette to use, and I feel that this is the ultimate palette to get. This is the best palette that I've seen so far. It's called a Binning Munro. That's the style of it. And this particular one's made by the Little Brass Box Company in England, and it's amazing. There are other companies that do it as well. There's Craig Young that do it too, and I think there's a company in India that does it as well. But I find it a really helpful thing for my whole painting process. One of the other parts of this palette, which is worth mentioning really, is price. It is an expensive palette, and that does put a lot of people off this palette. It's about £500 for it, which does seem like a lot of money, and it really does. And I had to think hard to buy this palette when I bought it, because I was using a Holbein palette before, which I thought was okay until I started using this palette. Always when you use a new palette or buy something new, you think, is it better? But it really was a lot better than the Holbein palette. I like to use enamel palettes too, because the other choice is our plastic palettes, and plastic palettes are good, but I find with the way I mix the paints, I find, I don't know whether it's all the plastic palettes, but many plastic palettes that I've used, the paint sort of beads on the top of the surface. There's a beading effect, so I find it more difficult to mix the colours the way I like it, to mix them more carefully or to not over mix the colours. There's a sort of beading process with oil or plastic palettes, which are basically made of oil. And the phrase oil and water don't mix, I think that's the reason why they do tend to bead. But I don't find that with enamel palettes. The only time I find that with enamel palettes is when they've got a bit of grease on them maybe, and that stops the mixing process. But going back to cost again, if you have a hobby, if someone like me, if I have a hobby, I fully invest in the hobby. Like some people like golf, and a set of golf clubs can be £700 or £1,000, so that's a lot of money too. And the green fees, that's an expensive hobby. So I think you need to place cost of it in proportion to what you're doing and your hobby. If you're enthusiastic, £500 is a lot of money, but it's not too much money to invest in one of these things, and they last forever. You'll be able to hand them down through the family. They last a very, very long time. So for me, I think it's a great investment. The last but really important factor with plein air painting and equipment is the consideration of the bag in which you carry things. And I use this bag. It's a really old bag. It must be made in probably the 1980s. I had it lying around the house, and just luckily it fitted. And it's a camera bag, and it just fits everything in perfectly. My Tupperware base goes at the bottom, my watercolour palette goes in, my sketching pad goes in, which is great, and I have a little pencil case here where I have a spray bottle for water and my pencils and pencil sharpeners, and then of course my brushes go in as well. So everything goes in that, and I find that a really convenient thing. All I've got to do is just grab one bag, and I've got everything, and I know everything's in there, so that's a really good thing to get. And maybe look around. Camera bags are great. They're a little padded nature to them as well, so that's handy too. I hope you got something from that. It's very important to consider what you take with you on watercolour. Everything has its place, and weight is such a factor, especially for me with all the camera gear. So it's good to show you that, and I hope you got something from it. We've been photographing this by the banks of Loch Moray. So there's a little bit of noise and waves and wind. That's always the case in the west coast of Scotland. There's always a bit of wind lying around. We're heading off now to the ferry in Mallaig to maybe have a little quick trip to Egg and a little island just off the coast here. And then we're going to head up to Skye for a really big tour going around painting and sketching. And hopefully you can come and join us on that in the weeks to come. And I hope you enjoy that too. Anyway, good to see you, and thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.